Have you ever imagined being dismissed in a place you created yourself? Sounds like a movie script, but it's real. And this is one of those stories that leave a mark, stir something inside us, and make us rethink everything. Helena walked into the store as a complete stranger. She wore simple clothes, her face showed the fatigue of someone who works hard, and she carried a worn-out backpack on her shoulders. No makeup, no high heels, no sign of status. Just her, in the most human and authentic way possible. The moment she stepped through the door, the looks began, not of admiration, but of judgment. The saleswomen scanned her from head to toe with subtle disdain, as if they already knew everything about her just based on her appearance. No warm greeting, no offer of help. On the contrary, one of them, without even getting up from her chair, simply pointed and said with a cold smile, "The sales section is in the back, okay?" Helena nodded silently and walked on, quiet, but attentive to every detail. What those employees didn't know, and likely never imagined, was that they were in front of the brand's new owner. That's right, the founder, the mind behind every window display, every background track, every subtle fragrance floating in the air. Years ago, Helena had created that store with a clear purpose, to offer more than just products. She wanted to create a space of welcome, of real beauty, of empathy. But what she found that day was the exact opposite. And that's the central point of this story. How many stories like Helena's repeat themselves out there every single day? Incredible people being made invisible just because they don't look the part. Brilliant ideas being ignored because they're wrapped in simplicity. Businesses slowly collapsing because they're blind, stuck in hollow aesthetics, disconnected from what truly matters, the human experience. Helena didn't react with anger. She didn't raise her voice or reveal her identity to shame anyone. She responded with silence, with strategy, with presence. The next day, she gathered the company's board and shared her experience, without naming names, without pointing fingers. She simply showed the security footage of her visit. Every gesture, every dismissive look, every act of contempt was there, raw and undeniable. The leaders in the room could barely hide their shame. But Helena didn't want revenge. She wanted change. And that's how it all began. A new protocol was implemented. Surprise visits conducted by real customers and anonymous members of the board, blending in with the regular crowd to evaluate service authentically. Reports now came with human stories, filled with details that spreadsheets could never capture. And slowly, the company's culture began to shift. The stories that once went unnoticed began to be heard. Simplicity came to be seen as strength. Name tags stopped mattering more than eye contact. And the saleswomen who once judged began to listen. To welcome, to understand that true luxury isn't in the price of a handbag, but in the respect shown to each person, no matter how they're dressed, the color of their skin, or the size of their wallet. Helena turned a silent failure into a global example of human-centered leadership. She started receiving invitations to speak at conferences, panels, and interviews, but she never spoke about fashion or profits. She always spoke about people, about respect, about listening, and especially about the stories that, when heard with the heart, can turn any business upside down, for the better. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's a manifesto for awareness, because maybe you're making the same mistake right now without even realizing it. Maybe you're brushing off someone who could be your future partner, client, mentor, or even your boss. Maybe you're passing over the next great talent just because they don't fit the ideal profile you had in mind. And this applies not just to companies, but to friendships, to life. So here's the question. How many Helenas have you ignored out there? How many golden opportunities walked right past you, disguised in simplicity? How many doors did you close based on a snap judgment? The best stories don't always come with a badge, a dazzling resume, or a striking appearance. Sometimes they arrive humbly, but they carry within them a revolution. And you? Will you keep judging by what you see? Or are you ready to truly see? If this content stirred something inside you, if it made you rethink your habits, your choices, your way of treating others, share it. Because the world doesn't need more speeches. It needs more people willing to listen, welcome, and transform. Here we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them to awaken. And who knows, maybe the next great turning point in your life is walking in with a worn-out backpack and a tired gaze, but a heart full of purpose. Helena entered without drawing attention. A worn backpack on her shoulders, hair pulled back in a messy bun, and a dress that didn't stand out. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those days when no one expects big plot twists. The saleswomen, unaware of that woman's true identity, carried on as if she were invisible. No smile, no good afternoon. Just that automatic look of someone who judges before asking, and right there, unknowingly, they stood before one of the most revealing stories a luxury brand would ever live. The most surprising part? This happens more often than people think. Amazing individuals carrying extraordinary life experiences are dismissed in the blink of an eye for seeming too ordinary. And that raises the question, how many opportunities have already been lost because of a rushed glance? Helena didn't get angry. She observed. She wasn't looking for a dress. She was looking for truths hidden in the details. And anyone working in customer service needs to understand, real insight doesn't lie in appearances, but in a keen, attentive gaze. This type of situation reveals what no internal report ever could. No standard training reaches what this kind of lived experience exposes. And when used wisely, that kind of moment becomes gold in terms of learning. Helena didn't know exactly what she would find, but she was about to realize that the issue wasn't just the staff, it was something deeper, something pointing to the next step she needed to take. Nothing about that disguise was random. The worn-out backpack, the bare face, the calm and discreet steps, it was all intentional. Helena didn't want applause, she wanted authenticity. And there's no better thermometer for that than watching how others react to what appears too simple. In that store, Helena was just another customer. And that's exactly what she needed to be to understand where the company's culture had gone off track. The stories that arise from silent tests are always the most powerful. We're always talking about purpose, values, and mission. But do they still live within the walls of the company? Or have they become nothing more than pretty phrases framed in the reception area? Helena wanted answers, and she knew they wouldn't come through email or spreadsheets. Want an example? Imagine walking into your own restaurant in disguise and ordering the cheapest item on the menu. Would you be treated well? That's how you test the foundation of any business, through real impact, raw contact with the truth. And the most incredible part is that this kind of test doesn't require big productions. It requires courage. The courage to see what really happens when no one knows you're watching. Helena had that courage. And what she saw went far beyond what she expected. It was as if the store had traded soul for appearance, essence for vanity. And little did she know, even more painful discoveries were yet to come. Helena left the store quietly, without making a scene. But inside her, a storm raged. That brand was her child. She had dreamed it, built it, refined every detail with her heart. And now, seeing everything treated like a stage for superficial appearances hurt more than any betrayal. The stories that built that brand were rooted in empathy, active listening, and genuine care. But what she witnessed was the exact opposite, and the wound it opened wasn't just personal, it was institutional. It's easy to lose your essence when success arrives. When the numbers go up, the windows shine, and the spotlight turns on, many forget why they started. And if you're a leader or entrepreneur, stop and reflect. Is your team still living the values you planted back then? Helena didn't need reports to know the answer. She saw it in the empty eyes of the saleswomen, the robotic words, the mocking laugh. It wasn't a lack of training, it was a lack of humanity. And that's where the real challenge of leadership lies, keeping the soul of the business alive when no one else seems to care. Helena knew the solution wasn't in firing people or giving motivational speeches. It was deeper. It was a disconnection from purpose. And when that happens, there's only one path left. Face the truth, head on, without filters or excuses. The next morning felt like any other day, but those who know great stories understand that the most impactful chapters often hide in ordinary days. Helena called for an internal evaluation. No notice, no context. The employees, unbothered, thought it would be just another routine meeting, until the lights went out and the screen lit up. What appeared wasn't a PowerPoint of goals, it was the store's security footage. And there they were, ignoring the CEO. Have you ever thought about what you'd see if you could silently watch how your team behaves when they think no one's paying attention? That's the rawest, and perhaps most effective, way to understand what your culture is really delivering. Helena didn't yell, didn't interrupt. She just let the truth speak for itself. And at that moment, the truth needed no subtitles. Faces began to shift. The laughter from minutes ago gave way to discomfort. This kind of confrontation is never easy, but it's necessary. Because sometimes the only way to heal is to rip the wound wide open. Helena knew that was just the first step. She wasn't looking to punish. She wanted to awaken. An awakening often begins with the shock of the mirror. But what would come next would demand far more than courage. It would demand a deep dive into collective awareness. Helena rose calmly when the video ended. The silence was thick, almost tangible. Then, without raising her voice, she introduced herself. "I'm Helena, founder of this brand, the one you ignored yesterday." No one moved. No one dared interrupt. One by one, the employees began to lower their heads. Some cried, others apologized. But what hurt the most wasn't the mistake itself. It was realizing the mistake had become routine. And those are the stories that cut the deepest. Have you ever had a moment when the truth hit like a bucket of cold water? The kind of revelation that leaves no room for excuses, only reflection? That's exactly what happened in that room. Helena didn't point fingers. She pointed mirrors. And sometimes the greatest act of leadership is just that, helping people see themselves, unfiltered. Because what's the use of a fancy badge if your character doesn't match? But the most curious thing was that Helena didn't seem to seek revenge. She sought transformation. And true transformation doesn't happen through yelling, it happens through discomfort, the kind that forces us to rethink our behavior. There, in front of the CEO, each employee had to face something that never appeared in their contracts, the responsibility of embodying a value. And once you see that, you can't keep acting the same. That's when Helena decided to do something different. Helena knew no real change would come from a PowerPoint or scripted training phrases, so she took the team to a women's shelter, a place where life is told in scars, and every gesture carries a weight unseen in store displays. The employees, still shaken from the previous meeting, entered the space hesitantly, but left transformed. Because there, among stories of survival, they discovered what respect truly means, the kind that doesn't depend on high heels or designer labels. In that raw, unfiltered environment, the saleswomen listened to the voices of women who overcame abandonment, hunger, and prejudice, women once seen as invisible, yet who carried more dignity than many suit-wearing executives. The stories told in that shelter held more power than any sales training. They didn't teach techniques, they taught humanity. And the lesson was clear: those who judge by appearance miss out on discovering the greatness within others. You don't forget an experience like that. It's like a switch flipping inside your mind. And Helena observed everything. No speeches, just watching each reaction, each tear, each silence. She knew that there, more than ever, a new chance at rebuilding was being born. Because once someone else's pain touches you, you can't go back to who you were. And what started as a shock was about to become growth. From that day on, something shifted in the employees' eyes. It wasn't just guilt or remorse, it was awareness, a new understanding of the role each of them played in the brand. Arrogance gave way to listening, judgment to curiosity, and what seemed like just another correction became a living lesson in humanity. The stories Helena inspired weren't just about sales, they were about seeing others with genuine respect, even without knowing who they are. In every customer interaction, there was now intention, no longer the empty script that treats people like numbers, but a more genuine, more present attitude. And that made a difference. Even in results, satisfaction increased, sales went up, and the work environment became lighter. A practical example? One of the saleswomen, inspired by a visit to a shelter, proposed a monthly action involving donations and personalized service for homeless women. It was approved instantly. Because when you learn through pain, action comes from the heart. Helena closely followed everything, but without interfering too much. She was like a gardener who knows that after the right pruning, the plant needs time to bloom. She offered support, listened more than she spoke, and patiently guided that reconstruction with firmness. True growth is like that. It requires discomfort, but it builds strong roots. And in that store that once hurt her, a new cycle was being born. More mature, more human, and even more challenging. The change wasn't just in speeches or team attitudes, it was in the brand's soul. Helena understood that teaching wasn't enough. It had to be institutionalized. From that point on, a new protocol was created. Listen before assuming. Clothing, perfume, or a watch on the wrist no longer mattered. What mattered was the story behind each customer. And that became company policy, not just a suggestion, a transformation that touched the day-to-day in concrete ways, and gave rise to new stories, now inspiring ones. It was reflected in everything, in hiring, in training, even in the store layout. The meeting table became a space for listening. The suggestion box became a channel for truth. What used to be appearance turned into essence. Want a simple example? Customers who didn't fit the profile used to be redirected. Today, they're invited for coffee, hear stories about the brand, and share their own. The result? Loyal customers, engaged staff, and a reputation that started to echo beyond the window displays. When Helena regained control of the company, she didn't want to just correct things. She wanted to restore the original purpose. And purpose isn't something you print on a badge. It's something you live every day. She knew maintaining it would require constant vigilance. But she also knew that when culture changes from the inside out, no one can pretend anymore. And with this new posture, the store began to draw attention in unexpected ways. It didn't take long for the story to spread. The store that once ignored ordinary customers became a reference in humanized service within the luxury market. Newspapers, magazines, and business portals began telling the story of the CEO who disguised herself to test her own creation and ended up exposing a flaw that few have the courage to face. Helena never sought the spotlight, but when you act with truth, the eyes of the world find you. And that's exactly what happened. Articles praised the initiative, conferences wanted her presence, and even competitors began reviewing their own protocols. The old culture based on appearance was replaced by something rarer, a culture of listening, of empathy, of care. Customers shared the experience of being treated with dignity, regardless of how much they spent. And the most powerful part? Some of these testimonials came from people who would have once been ignored. The stories were returning to where they should have always belonged. Even amid the recognition, Helena kept her feet on the ground. She knew that real prestige isn't in fame, it's in impact. And that culture doesn't sustain itself. It must be nurtured, day after day. But now, with an engaged team, a rediscovered purpose, and revived values, the brand had more than a new reputation. It had a mission. And like any mission, it needed to be remembered, every day. This is not just another one of those stories that move you for a moment and fade. It's a lesson for anyone who leads, serves, or dreams of building something with purpose. Helena showed that true leadership doesn't shout, flaunt, or command, it transforms. And transformation, my friend, starts in the most invisible gestures. How do you respond to someone who enters your life without status? How do you treat someone who doesn't seem important? Your answer says more about you than any diploma ever could. That's why instead of creating rules, Helena created awareness. Instead of imposing change, she made people want to change. Because when you show the real impact of indifference, no one wants to be indifferent anymore. Listening became protocol, and judgment became a warning sign. Even small rituals changed. Birthdays were now celebrated with letters, compliments became routine, and the word gratitude regained weight inside the company. And maybe in the end, that's the greatest lesson. The power we have to spark silent, yet profound changes. Helena walked into that store as a stranger, but walked out as a revolution. And that was only possible because she understood something few do, that the stories that truly change the world often begin with the simple act of observing without being noticed. So tell me, how many Helenas have you already ignored out there? How many extraordinary people crossed your path, on the street, at work, in the supermarket checkout, and you didn't even notice? How many brilliant ideas slipped through your fingers because you were stuck on an appearance, an accent, a simpler way of speaking? Yeah, it happens more than we'd like to admit. What many still don't understand is that the greatest stories of transformation begin in silence, sometimes in discomfort. The ones that shake us rarely come with fanfare or status. They show up in flip-flops with a backpack, worn-out clothes, and tired eyes. And if we're not open-hearted, they pass by, invisible. Helena was one of those. She entered the company without saying a word about who she truly was. With calm steps, she walked through the halls of the building she had dreamed of years before. She observed everything, from how employees were treated at reception to the tone supervisors used with interns. Every detail reflected what had been done to the legacy she built. But no one there knew who she was, so no one made an effort to welcome her. A receptionist barely looked up. A security guard sighed at a simple question. A manager wrinkled his nose and kept walking as if she didn't exist. Within minutes, Helena understood more about the company culture than any strategic report could show in months. And here comes the most painful and most powerful part. What should have been human had become robotic. Impeccable processes, top-tier structure, but cold people. People too rushed to see others, too busy to hear a story different from their own. But Helena wasn't looking for revenge. She wanted awareness. She wanted to provoke change, and she knew that sometimes the best way to teach is to let the mistake happen. because some things only embarrassment can cure. Days later, a meeting was called. One of those important ones, with everyone in suits, screens on, and coffee served on a tray. Helena showed up, this time with her name badge, full name displayed, and the same observant eyes as before. But now, no one dared ignore her. The room's silence felt like a collective apology. She didn't yell, didn't point fingers. She just showed footage, videos of the visit, dialogues captured by internal cameras, comments that didn't even belong in the last century. And she ended with one sentence: "The culture we pretend to have will one day charge us for what we truly practice." The impact was immediate. Some cried, some apologized, some didn't know where to look. But most importantly, some decided to change, to listen more, to welcome more, to respect more, because they understood that those silent stories we tend to ignore are, in fact, the ones we most urgently need to learn from. And you? How many opportunities have you missed because of a rushed judgment? How many talents have you lost because you chose appearance over essence? How many times have you treated someone with disdain, thinking it didn't matter? Let me tell you, it does. It always does. What's missing, most of the time, isn't a new strategy. It's not about hiring more or outsourcing problems. What's missing is presence, listening, humanity. What's missing is the reminder that behind every seemingly ordinary face might lie a story that can change everything. That's why we insist on telling these narratives. Because while some channels tell stories to entertain, we tell them to provoke, to disturb, to flip the switch, to make you look again and again, until you understand that no one is too small to teach and no one is too big to learn. Helena may have been ignored, but she didn't fade. She reignited the consciousness of an entire team. She showed that leadership isn't about titles, it's about courage, and that a culture is only real when it holds up even without the spotlight. So if this content moved you, don't let it pass. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with someone who needs that shift. Because tomorrow, who knows, the next story that's going to teach something huge might walk into your business dressed in simplicity. And the question is, will you notice?